Shares of Tesla, one of the best performers of the morning, soaring today following the president-elect's victory last night. Joining us to talk about what it means for Tesla, for big tech, for Elon Musk. Let's bring in Dan Ives, Wedbush Securities analyst, of course, a buy rating on Tesla, and a recent target at least of 300. Dan, good morning.
Yep.
Does that change, that number?
Look, I mean, I think it's a strategic bet that Musk made that ultimately could pay dividends for Tesla in a huge way for the coming years. I think $40 to $50 per share it adds just for beginners, not just because of what could happen from a tax credit perspective. I think leveling playing field, you take out the Detroit automakers, and then that's really going to give them an advantage from a cost, scale, and scope perspective. But I think the big thing here, Trump could ultimately fast-track autonomous FSD. And our whole view, as we've talked about in the show, $1 trillion of valuation just on AI alone. This is going to unlock it. That's a key.
Makes a lot of sense. Is there no scenario in which relations with China take a big hit and Musk is asked to pick a side, as in a sense?
Yeah, and I think that, so on the other side, especially, it's not just for Tesla, also Apple as well. For Musk, I think there's a comfort in him being in this situation that he could almost be a pseudo sort of, ambassador,
shadow diplomacy?
Call it 10% politician, 90% CEO, in terms of making sure that the retaliatory or the carve-out, I think that's going to be important. The carve-out piece from a tariff perspective, and I think one of the reasons that you see NVIDIA up today, you see Semi, you look at Apple, despite some fears about what we're going to see on tariffs, there's a view maybe with Musk there, bark could be a little worse than the bite when it comes to tariffs, specifically on AI. And I think that's really, right now, what's key, not just to AI, but to the broader tech sector.
You started off by saying you think this could materially help Tesla, having him in the White House. How? What sort of regulations are we watching?
So I think there's three things. One is that the EV tax credits get taken away. And I think that, even though negative for EV sector, bullish for Tesla because of their scale and scope. So from a price perspective.
Bad for Detroit, though, potentially.
Bad for Detroit. Bad for GM, bad for Ford.
Which you cover as well.
And my view going into this was like that was a potential risk, but I think Mary and the team have kind of pulled back a little, so it's not like they've bet it all on EVs. So I think one is going to be that where they get an advantage. Two, and I think probably most important, is this autonomous FSD. Because when you think about Cybercab and everything we've talked about, 26, could that be 25? Now, all of a sudden, if Trump clears the path there, this changes the whole paradigm, I think,
Are those regulatory
for
authorities that oversee full self-driving federal in nature so that that's where it is? It's not states that are involved? Or how does that work?
The Department of Transportation?
It's a great question. I mean, there's some state, but a lot of it's federal. And then I get in the third part is a big overhang here. I think just broader has been regulatory. I think another overhang has even been like FTC with Khan, in terms of not just for Tesla, but I think broader in big tech. I think the view of many investors I've talked to is Khan's likely out, in this scenario with Trump taking over, which is bullish for M&A, bullish for big tech, less regulation.
Right.
But when it comes to Tesla, it's all about Musk now having a say where he didn't have one, either Biden.
No, he's got a significant say. Let's talk very briefly here. Broader tech, generative AI, which we talk to you about a lot when we bring you on about NVIDIA. What do you think his impact will be there in terms of advising the administration, I guess, and what the policy may be?
He'll be what I'll call like an AI ambassador. I mean, that's essentially the role he could play from a tech perspective. There's comfort. I think it's part of why NVIDIA's up, why Apple's not down, despite some worries about retaliatory. Musk being there is, Twilight Zone as it sounds, actually gives some comfort that specifically on the AI piece that he could actually make sure that this does not have unintended consequences for the big tech trade, for Microsoft, for the hyperscalers. And I think that's something that's clearly at play here, especially with Musk having much bigger say in the White House.
Finally, when you think about state governments, right, Democratic states that might be recoiling at what happened at the federal level, does that not make them more antagonistic on FSD, at least?
Oh, no, I mean, like, this is going to be, you'll have battles that will continue to play on, for the coming years. But the big one is on the federal side. So especially what's going on in China, if Trump really tries to fast-track autonomous FSD, then everything we talked about at robotaxi day, instead of 3-4 years, that's 1-2 years ahead. And I think most of the investors I'm talking to, that's their big focus. Can this fast-track autonomous? I think the question is probably yes, and that's why we start to look at $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion market cap as this all plays out. It's a big part of the value.
Now, $19 away from your target. Keep us updated.
That will.
Good to see you.
Great.
Dan Ives.